There's a commercial version and a free version, and that allows some data mining of that type of stuff, and then link it together in a sort of a link chart. So kind of traditional intelligence type space there. And then there's SRA's NetOwl and OneView Analyst, which do kind of heavy-duty intelligence correlation. I mentioned these things. I don't know if they're actually productized, so don't call anybody, I guess. Technical tools. So here's kind of a little secret for anybody that's in management. If you buy the team toys, you don't have to pay them as much. Just don't tell my employer that. So an iPad will certainly suffice above a raise in many situations. So the technical analysis cell will require a bunch of toys to actually function, though. And it will keep them happy and working hard. Ultimately, though, the justification for these toys is that it will reduce the time spent per incident and for each case for analysis. In one example, at my current project, we were able to reduce the analytic time by 4 or 5 hours per case by implementing a technical solution that I'll talk about in a minute called CW Sandbox. So we were able to completely cut down on the analytic time, which allowed us to handle more incidents and to handle those incidents a little bit deeper and a little bit more intelligently. So the following tools are not a complete list. There's plenty of other tools out there, but they've been extremely helpful in some of the shops that I've worked in. So Sandboxing. So Sandbox allows the execution of malicious software in a safe environment to understand what it does. Having an internal sandbox or access to a sandbox can reduce the analytic time pretty significantly. And if you have an internal sandbox, it'll let you kind of start building one of those trending databases about what malware affects your organization. First, there's some freely available. Sunbelt Software has a CW Sandbox. That's probably my favorite sandbox product that I've worked with. Anubis is another similar type of sandbox. Norman, which is not really a sandbox, it's kind of a debugger that virtualizes the operating system's API calls. And then VirusTotal, which is completely not a sandbox. It's just a list of they take every known antivirus signature, and if you upload a piece of malware or a hash to a piece of malware, they'll let you know what the threats are, what threats they identify there. Very useful website. But I will say, on a side note, operationally, if somebody's written custom malware against your organization, and there is only against your organization, and they're looking to see, did you find this malware? If you upload it to VirusTotal, the bad guys also check VirusTotal, so they'll see that you found it and uploaded it. So I always recommend, if you're going to use VirusTotal, which is a very useful website, to only do it with MD5 hashes of the file that you're interested in to see if it's a known threat. And then there's commercial versions of the above. Certainly worth having as well, and not terribly expensive. I know that the Sunbelt Sandbox was, I think, like roughly $60,000. So not, in the security space, not too expensive. So packet analysis. So this helps you reconstruct incidents. And I've told a couple of people this, that you can't do this kind of work. You can't really analyze an incident without being able to look backwards and see what happened. So in a recent incident that I was working, I was able to reverse the malware, find what the obfuscation was in the command and control channel, and then take all of the packet capture data from that incident and decrypt it to see what the bad guys did, see how they entered the system, where they moved laterally, and stuff like that. So this is a plug for my buddy Amit, who couldn't be here today. Netwitness, a really cool tool for doing analysis. The Netwitness product is a little bit different than the other ones because it does do a lot more analysis and lets you kind of find things that you don't know you're looking for. So it breaks the network traffic up into those nouns, verbs, and adjectives that I talked about earlier. There is a free version. Net Detector, which is a Nixon product, also coupled with NetVCR, does packet capture and can be used for pulling the raw PCAPs from an incident. Not so much heavy on the analysis. It does have an onboard snort engine that lets you kind of write rules for it, but certainly also interesting product. And Wireshark, which is also freely available. So I think when I put this slide together, Netwitness didn't have an open source product, so they actually do have a community version that you can download. Wireshark also kind of the de facto packet analysis tool. And if you're really not running a lot of bandwidth, you could probably just run TCP dump, I guess, on a system. All right, so Disassembler. This is going to be pretty critical for the technical team. All executable code written by humans must be compiled in order to execute, unless you're some sort of superhuman. Compiled code is difficult to look at. It's hex, so you're just going to see, FF, 3R, or not 3R, 3A, CC. So a disassembler allows technical analysis to break apart the compiled code to understand what it does and to look for vulnerabilities perhaps in the malware or in the code or some hidden intent if there's something that's Trojaned with a backdoor or something like that, you can look through it. The de facto tool for this is IDA Pro from Hexrays. It's available for about $500 per license. There's also a free version, which is 4.9, which can be downloaded from Hexrays. And there's also a demo version for like a limited amount of time or something like that. The one thing about that is it's tremendously difficult to use because it's so powerful. So definitely need to at least get some training or a book on how to use that tool because it's certainly very difficult. You could also write your own, I guess, but that's probably, you won't be sitting in here if you're writing your own disassembler. So development tools. So not necessary for the cyber stuff, but certainly helpful. A good bargain for this is the MSDN subscription. So it's like, I think $3,000 for an MSDN subscription, and that gets you access to every Microsoft operating system and product for the most part. And it gives you full access to Visual Studio. So certainly when you're reverse engineering, you want to be able to kind of test things and maybe write some custom tools to do some of the reversing for you. This is certainly helpful. Forensics tools. This is going to help kind of the incident process and understand the incidents. Allow in-depth analysis of compromised or misused systems. So if you had an incident and you want to do forensics on it, or if you think that somebody might be up to no good, you can pull their hard drive and do the forensics that way. And if legal action is necessary at some point, you can use these tools and they're kind of, you can hand this over to law enforcement, you can hand this over to the legal team, and they've been vetted by the U.S. court system. Common and accepted forensics tools that are out there, there's Encase, there's Forensics Toolkit. With Encase and Forensics Toolkit, they're kind of, Encase does a lot of processing while you're doing the analysis, whereas Forensics Toolkit does a lot of processing before you do the analysis. So if you're impatient like me, you probably prefer Encase because you just want to start playing. But if you have time to kind of parse through and do all the data carving and stuff like that, Forensics Toolkit, I would typically recommend both just because sometimes you'll find things in one that you won't find in another, feature-wise. For mobile devices, which is increasingly becoming an issue, things like iPhones and Blackberries and iPads, doing analysis on these things, Parabin is kind of the leader in mobile device forensics. So free stuff. The good news is here that there's lots of free tools. There's debuggers for dynamic code analysis. So things like OWI-debug, WinDebug, Immunity Debug, all freely available and readily downloadable. There's the systems internals or the sysinternals tool set, which can do things like monitor for file changes, registry changes, processes that are spawned during code execution, things along those lines. These are kind of the de facto tools that you'll find on if you Google how to reverse engineer. And then there's memory forensics tools. This is out of date. Mandiant released a tool called Memorize, which is freely available by Peter Silverman and Jamie Butler. Very cool tool that lets you kind of take memory snapshots, look at everything that's going on in memory. You could certainly do some cool things, like it can parse snort-style rule sets to look for things in memory and alert on it within the tool. The tool is called Memorize, and that's like the executable. And then there's a freely available GUI for it called Audit Viewer, which also lets you kind of view and poke around. The other cool thing there is that you can, they have like some metrics that they apply to processes and things in memory so that they could say, oh, this is definitely kind of shady because we've seen this before. I think they call it I'm not sure what they call it. The other one is HB Gary has some